By the time humanity met its neighbors, the habit of taking hostages was already ancient among the stars. Empires had swapped royal heirs as guarantees of peace long before any human ship left its cradle. Criminal syndicates had learned that abducting administrators, freighter captains, junior spouses, and lesser cousins was an effective way to grease negotiations. When a power balance was too delicate for open war, you took a person instead of a border system. There were rules, of a sort. Most species did not write them down, but everyone felt their edges. You did not harm the hostage unless utterly cornered. You allowed time for discussion. You accepted concessions that let the opponent save face. It was ugly, but everyone told themselves it was civilized. So when a Kraethel crime lieutenant named Veskir ordered his operatives to seize a human child from an orbital city, he believed he was doing something perfectly normal. He also believed he understood how humans would react. He was wrong on both counts. On the day it began, the cylindrical habitat called Ararat Spindle rolled serenely in the dark. Sunlight panels glittered along its spine, catching rays from the distant star and feeding its rotating gardens inside. In one of those gardens, a classroom of human children walked hand in hand along a path of soft synthetic moss, trailing behind a patient teacher. Noura was at the back of the line. As usual, she liked to lag, not out of rebellion, but because it let her linger over things the others overlooked. Today, it was a patch of climbing vines clinging to an old maintenance wall, each leaf painted a slightly different color by auxiliary lamps. Someone had once called the vines weeds, but Noura had overheard her mother arguing to keep them. Life is stubborn, Dr. Leena had told the Habitat Committee. Let it show us how. Noura ran her fingers along the vines, feeling the faint grit of artificial bark. Eyes forward, Noura, the teacher called, not unkindly. We're going to see the viewing ring before 3 p.m. Yes, instructor, Noura said, and trotted to close the gap, shoes squeaking on the soft path. Far away, in a sealed control center deeper in the spindle's infrastructure, Leena floated at a console ringed with holoscreens. The room was in microgravity, decoupled from the slow spin of the main habitat to keep delicate instruments level. Around her, charts and graphs described the birth of a new node in the Ariadne net. Leena knew every line of code forming beneath her hands. Years ago, she had sketched the first versions of the distributed sensor and communications lattice on the back of cafeteria napkins. Now, lines of tiny human and alien stations flocked across star maps, forming a mesh that let humanity see ripples in gravity and energy far beyond what their small navy could physically patrol. Today's work, bringing the Solance relay fully online. Once integrated, it would stitch 3 corridors of human and Mothri space into a seamless channel. Leena checked the time, 1 p.m. station standard. Noura would be with her class, somewhere above her, everything running as it should. She did not know that in an undocumented docking bay, Kraethel contractors disguised as maintenance workers checked the seals on their sham repair pods. The Kraethel were a species of fluid grace in microgravity, all coiling tentacles and rippling mantles, eyes arranged like a crown around their central mass. In atmosphere, they wore exosuits that turned them into floating globes, but they preferred the dark corners between habitats, where air was thin and laws thinner. There, their ability to anchor themselves to any surface, to ooze through tiny spaces, made them difficult to dislodge. Veskir was not present in person. He watched through a cluster of eyes on a remote drone, its sensory feed relayed to him from an anonymized relay deep in the Capri expanse. Around him, on his hidden base, Kraethel thugs and accountants drifted among chained cargo pods, busy with the ordinary commerce of extortion. He had studied the dossiers on Dr. Leena. Her importance to the Ariadne net made her a prime pressure point. He knew the basic facts of human reproductive investment, their emotional bond to offspring, their brittle, sentimental monogamy. He had seen lesser criminals snatch human traders and return them, unharmed, for modest concessions. His plan, in his own assessment, was elegant. Take the child. Demand a narrow access corridor into the Ariadne net, just enough to move unregistered cargo. Offer reassurances. Deliver the hostage quickly once the payment arrived. The humans would grieve and rage privately, perhaps, but publicly they would accept the bargain. In time, they would treat the hole in their sensor web as an inconvenience, one more invisible parasite in a galaxy full of parasites. His drone eyes flexed in anticipation as the maintenance pods departed their dock and slid along the exterior of Ararat's spindle, hugging its logs of scheduled repairs. Inside the spindle, an emergency drill sounded at precisely 1:32 p.m. It was routine. Doors cycled. Teachers led classes to assembly points. The synthetic gravity decoupled for a moment as spin dampers tested their fail-safes, letting the children experience that brief thrill of weightlessness. Noura's class, halfway to the viewing ring, were guided into a broad radial corridor lined with doors. "We will wait until the safety officer gives us the all-clear," the teacher explained, catching herself as she bumped gently against a handrail. Noura watched dust motes drift in the air. Her stomach fluttered with the freedom of reduced spin. When the wall panels along one side of the corridor hissed open in apparent response to the drill, the children barely noticed. Smooth, rounded pods extended into the corridor like beckoning mouths. "Secondary shelter nodes," the teacher said, relaxing. "Good. They're actually synced for once. All right, everyone, one by one. Keep holding hands. It's safer that way." Noura followed her classmates into the pod, squeezing into a ring of padded seats. A curved viewport showed a slice of the corridor beyond. Instructor Yao counted heads, laughed away their nervousness, keyed a code into a panel Noura could not see. The hatch slid shut. There was a soft thump, a sense of motion sideways. Noura felt pressure shift in her ears. The emergency lights flicked to red for a heartbeat, then returned to white. "See? Nothing to—" Instructor Yao never finished her sentence. The world outside the viewport moved. The pod drifted not inward, toward the secure shelter hub in the station's core, but outward. The curved wall of the corridor vanished as the pod slid along a track into a maintenance tube. For a breathless moment, Noura saw nothing but the dark curve of a tunnel. Then the pod cleared the rim of Ararat's spindle, and the stars opened. The teacher's face went white. She lurched toward the controls, hands scrabbling for manual overrides that were no longer connected. None of the children screamed yet. They stared, transfixed, at the sight of their home curving away beneath them, its sunlit panels and green-banded windows receding. Outside, a compact shuttle the color of cold ink latched onto the pod with a hidden arm, swallowing it into its underside. Its pilot, a Kraethel operative with a worker's number for a name, triggered a string of falsified telemetry that told Ararat Spindle's safety systems the pod had docked with a legitimate shelter hub. The entire operation took less than 3 minutes. In the orbit control center, an Olikari consultant floated at a console, crystalline fronds slowly shifting in light as they monitored station traffic. Subtle anomalies flickered in the sensor logs. A repair pod on a non-standard course. A misaligned transponder code. The Olikari noted them for later review, confident that nothing truly serious could result from one stray pod in such well-patrolled space. Back in the Ariadne Net Control Center, Leena Borodin's console chimed, a routine notification that an emergency drill had executed successfully. She acknowledged it without looking up, eyes on a simulation of interstellar signal propagation. At 1:46 p.m., a security officer on Ararat Spindle checked the drill report, saw that all pods reported docked, and signed off. At 2:02 p.m., in an empty classroom smelling of chalk and metal, Instructor Yao's colleagues began to wonder why she had not returned with her group. At 2:28 p.m., a frantic intercom call reached the station's internal security office. The children from Section 3 had not arrived at any shelter hub. At 2:31 p.m., Leena's console chimed again, this time with the hard edge of a priority summons. She saw the word missing next to Noura's name and did not, for several heartbeats, truly understand. She had studied system failures her whole life. A sensor glitch here, an uncooperative relay there. Everything could be debugged, traced, corrected. Missing did not fit the shape of any failure she knew. By 2:45 p.m., Ararat Spindle had sealed outbound docks and begun broadcasting a quiet but urgent lock on all internal transit systems. At 3 p.m., the first scrub surface shuttle with an erased transponder cleared the outer ring of the station on a vector that matched nothing on the official charts. Inside that shuttle, the captured pod clicked into a cargo frame. Its hatch cycled. A breath of processed air washed over the occupants. Instructor Yao saw the Kraethel first. She had worked on joint projects, seen holobooks, but nothing prepares a mind for the sight of an alien that does not echo any ancestral predator. The Kraethel operative clung easily to the shuttle's ceiling, tentacles gripping the struts. Its mantle pulsed with subtle colors. Its ring of eyes glittered under the cabin lights. Beside it, human-shaped drones held slung weapons. The children did not scream until the operative spoke in carefully enunciated, "Trade, you will be quiet," it said. "You will be unharmed if your people are wise." Noura heard the words without processing their meaning. She stared at the alien, then at the walls of the shuttle beyond, then at the stars through a small porthole. For the first time in her life, she understood that her home was not the whole universe, and that the universe did not have to be kind. Far behind them, in the calm of the Ariadne net hub, Leena nearly tore her data cables free as she pushed away from her console. Alarms and map projections swirled past, ignored. She collided with the hatch frame and rebounded, making the rookie mistake of trying to run in microgravity. Her colleagues reached out, anchoring her. A technician read from a panel, voice shaking. "Emergency pod 3 to 12 reports docked, but the shelter hub never received it. Internal sensors show an unauthorized voiding event at maintenance hatch 7. Leena did not hear the details. One thought hammered through her. Noura is not on this station. Her mind supplied images it had no data for. The old stories of pirates, slavers, ransomers. A cold, mathematical corner of her brain began calculating transit times, signal delays, likely escape vectors. "Who has her?" she whispered. No one yet had an answer. The answer reached them that evening, though evening on the station was just a shift change and a soft dimming of lights. At 7 p.m., New Samarkand's multi-species diplomatic hall received a transmission on a narrow-beam encrypted band. The envelope was addressed to Dr. Leena Borodin and to the Office of the Solar Boundary Fleet Liaison. The message originated from a disposable relay in the Kepri expanse, bounced through 3 stolen comm buoys to mask its true source. It contained, among other things, a grainy clip from a cranial camera in Instructor Yao's class. Ambassador Tomasz Mirek replayed the footage 3 times before he allowed anyone else to see it. He was a compact man, his hair receding, his eyes lined at the edges not from age alone, but from a career spent watching the small failures of diplomacy become large disasters. He had negotiated with Zinthari admirals, coaxed Olikari elders out of cycles of profit blindness, charmed Mathri elders over endless teas. He had never, until today, watched a classroom of children sail out of their home into the black. The clip began with Noura's hand on the maintenance vines, then cut to the pod interior. The children's laughter, the shiver of motion, the widening eyes as Ararat's spindle receded. It ended abruptly as the pod was swallowed by the Kraethel shuttle. Tomasz closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. "Get me Captain Ochoa," he told his aide. Now, Captain Rian Ochoa was in a different building on New Samarkand, a long, low structure that pretended to be a civilian operations center, but housed the forward command of the Solar Boundary Fleet. When the call came, he was reviewing a quiet incident report about a smuggling skiff that had tried to bypass tariffs. He had the look of someone built for the frontier, a little too wiry to be reassuring in a parade uniform, movements precise from years spent in microgravity, dark eyes that never fully relaxed. A faint scar curved along his jaw, the legacy of a youthful training mishap with a misfired grapnel. His career file, if anyone bothered to read it fully, showed a pattern of assignments to places where things were likely to go wrong. His aide floated a hand terminal over. "Ambassador Mirek, sir. Priority red. It's about Ararat's spindle." Rian glanced at the color strip on the edge of the call. Red meant life and death with political implications. He accepted the connection. Tomasz appeared as a holo above the console, rendered in crisp detail. Behind him, Rian saw the diplomatic hall's sober wood tones and a blur of motion. "Captain," Tomasz said, skipping pleasantries. "We have a kidnapping. A child from Ararat Spindle. There's a message. You need to see this." Rian watched the clip in silence. His jaw tightened. His fingers curled lightly against the console. When it ended, he inhaled once, slowly, as if drawing something into himself and locking it away. "Has anyone claimed responsibility?" he asked. "There is an attached statement," Tomasz said. "We have not responded. I want your office involved before we say a word." "Send it," Rian said. The ransom demand was wordy in the way of people who believed they were being reasonable. It identified Veskir Droll as a representative of a consortium operating in the Kepri expanse. It made reference to the child as a valued guest whose continued well-being depends upon a mutual understanding. It politely requested that Dr. Leena Borodin, on behalf of her people's censor authority, provide access keys for a narrow corridor through the Ariadne net mesh. In exchange, the message promised the child would be returned unharmed within 3 days. There were assurances that the access corridor would be used only for legitimate commerce, that disruptions would be minimal, that, in the grand scheme, this would be a small concession for a great peace. Ryan read the message once, then again, then a third time. His mind flicked through tactical implications. A blind lane through the net where hostile traffic could move unseen. A permanent vulnerability in human situational awareness. The precedent it would set. He thought of Noura's face in the clip, the way she had clutched the seat. "I've seen worse," he said, mostly to himself, remembering other kidnappings in other ports, the frantic agreements, the quiet payouts. In every one of those, someone had argued that a small hole in principle was worth a whole person's life. Tomasz watched him carefully. "There's more," the ambassador said. "They sent this to Leena directly as well. She's on New Samarkand, en route here with station security. She is not thinking strategically at the moment. Nor should she have to," Rian said. "That's my job." He tapped a control. "I want the Ariadne net liaison present, and get word to Mathri representation. They'll hear about this anyway. Let them see how we handle it." At 7:30 p.m., in a windowless conference room between the diplomatic wing and the fleet command center, they gathered. Dr. Leena Borodin arrived first, flanked by 2 Ararat Spindle security officers who seemed unsure whether to restrain her or hold her up. She had insisted on coming in person as soon as the first clipped, unverifiable message had arrived. Her face looked wrong to her colleagues. Too still, as if any expression might crack something essential. She settled into a seat with mechanical precision, hands folded tightly enough to whiten the knuckles. Ambassador Tomasz Mirek followed, nodding to her with an awkward attempt at comfort that she did not return. Behind him, Selkin Haru entered with the smooth, gliding walk of a Mathri accustomed to balancing on ships and planetary gravity wells alike. Selchen's form was humanoid in the broad sense. 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, a head. But his skin was a mosaic of overlapping scales that shimmered between muted colors, and his eyes were deeply set, protected by layered brows. He wore the diplomatic sash of the Mathri ascendancy, its colors indicating authority and responsibility more than rank. "I came as soon as I heard," Selchen said, bowing slightly. "It touches upon shared protocols." He stopped as his gaze met Leena's. His people valued children, too. He inclined his head in what his culture meant as sympathy. Rian arrived last, bringing with him a slim man in a plain uniform whose name, Miran Ochoa, was pinned in unassuming letters. Miran's eyes were the focus of someone who spent more time watching data than people, but he took in the room with a quick flicker of understanding. He had already seen the ransom demand. Rian had forwarded it before leaving his office. The message played on the main wall, Veskir's modulated voice oozing false reasonableness. Noura's brief, shaky clip followed. Leena did not watch the clip again. She stared at the table surface. Her mind replayed her daughter's last morning instead. A forgotten breakfast spoon. A mismatched pair of socks. A complaint about math. She felt a hot, animal noise claw at her throat and held it down only by force of will. When the lights came up, no one spoke immediately. Selchen was the first to break the silence. "There are procedures for these situations," he said. "We should establish communication, request proof of ongoing health, Explore compromise. My government would be willing to serve as guarantor.
No, Leena said, her voice so flat that the word was like a blade laid on the table.
Selken blinked, his scales darkening for a moment in surprise. Dr. Borodin, he began carefully. I understand the depth of your concern, but a measured approach may.
They want access to the net,
Leena said, still not looking up. To the system that warns us when a Zinthari battle group twitches in its sleep, to the early anomaly reports that keep Habs from being caught in a mining mishap. Give them that corridor and they own everything that moves through it. They will use human children as leverage for every blind spot they want. She lifted her head, finally meeting Selchen's gaze. There was something in her eyes that made the Mathri diplomat feel, for the first time in a long while, that he was not the one with the broadest view of things. If we trade my daughter for that, Leena said, we are telling the galaxy that this is how you move us. This is how you get what you want. How long do you think it will take before every syndicate, every petty warlord tries the same thing? Rian Ochoa watched her as closely as he watched the scrolling data on his hand terminal. In her words, he heard the echo of conversations from years ago, when the Solar Boundary Fleet had quietly hammered out internal doctrines with input from people who had seen the worst of interstellar crime. Rian's mind had already gone to the same place. He had been a junior officer then, sitting in rooms full of older men and women who spoke in measured terms about ugly possibilities. Someone had laid out projections. If hostage-taking of human civilians was allowed to succeed, then on the scale of decades, the incidence would rise sharply. The cost in lives and social cohesion would be catastrophic. Humans, the analysis had said, would either accept this and quietly convert part of their economy into ransom funds, or they would react badly enough to change the environment. A working group had been formed, its recommendations classified and archived under a simple, unassuming label, Sigrun Protocol. Rian had not thought about that file in years. Now, its contents rose in his memory with crystal clarity. He looked at Tomasz. The ambassador's gaze met his. Something passed between them. An old understanding of what those recommendations had implied. We have been here, in theory, before, Rian said softly. He addressed his words to the room, but his eyes were on Tomasz and Miran. We wrote a doctrine for it. Selchen's scales lightened in curiosity. A doctrine, he repeated. For the taking of civilians. For the taking of children, Miran said, his voice almost as flat as Leena's had been. Specifically, the Sigrun Protocol. Selken searched his memory. He prided himself on knowing the outlines of human policy tools, especially in frontier security, but the name meant nothing to him. I am unfamiliar with this, he said. It has not been discussed in public fora. It wasn't meant to be, Rian said. He folded his hands on the table. They were steady. Inside, he felt a familiar, cold focus settle into place, the same feeling that came before ordering a dangerous maneuver. The idea was simple. Hostage-taking of human children is defined as an existential psychological threat. If it is allowed to be profitable, it spreads. So we decided it would not be profitable. He glanced at Leena. The protocol says, you do not negotiate in good faith. At most, you draw things out. You mobilize quickly and in depth. You commit not just military assets, but financial, political, and informational tools. The goal is not solely to recover the hostage. The goal is to ensure that everyone watching concludes that kidnapping a human child is the worst investment they can possibly make. Tomasz nodded, solemn. We were careful, he added. We took into account the delicate balance of everything. We agreed to hold this doctrine in reserve, use it rarely, if ever. But we also promised ourselves that if it were invoked, we would not half-measure. Selchen listened, unease coiling in his stomach. He knew human capacity for stubbornness. He had seen it on negotiation tables. He had not before considered what might happen if that stubbornness was focused not on a treaty clause but on a personal violation. Leena's eyes closed for a moment. Invoke it, she said. Please. Rian had already made his decision. He had made it somewhere between the first frame of Noura's video and the last, but he needed Tomasz's assent, for what would follow would not stay within purely military lines. Tomasz gave a single, sharp nod. "On behalf of civilian oversight," he said, "I concur. The case meets the criteria." Rian reached for his hand terminal, fingers playing over a sequence of authorizations he had never expected to use. Quiet alerts spread through the Solar Boundary Fleet's classified channels, waking up dormant procedures. "Then we begin," he said. "And we send a reply." Miran had already sketched several potential replies while the others talked. Polite stall tactics, hints at negotiation, outright threats. None of them fit what the protocol called for. Rian thought about the Kraethel who had written that smug, oily message. He thought about the galaxy watching, not yet aware, but soon to realize something new had entered its calculus. "Show me the channel they used," he said. Miran slid the routing diagram onto the central display. "Encrypted through an anonymized relay in Kepri," he said. "We can trace it, but it will take hours to resolve the last few hops." "We don't need their real location yet," Rian replied. "We just need them to know what happens next." He dictated the reply himself. It was not long. It did not mention Noura's name. It did not argue morality. It did not threaten vengeance in high rhetoric. It acknowledged receipt of the message. It stated, in clear terms, that the demand could not and would not be met. It informed the sender that, as of this moment, they and all their affiliates had been classified under Sigrun Protocol parameters. It included a list of tags culled from the Kraethel's own communication, vessel designations, handled currencies, known associates, docking patterns, and it ended with a single sentence that, stripped of toponyms and personal identifications, carried the same weight in any language. "We suggest you make peace with your gods because we have already begun." Miran dispatched the message along the same channel Veskir had used. The bits flowed out into the tangle of comm nodes, raced along familiar routes into less familiar shadows. Far away, in a dim cargo well hung with stolen goods, Veskir Droll watched the incoming transmission alert bloom on his data wall. He had been expecting panicked bargaining, perhaps a tearful plea from the mother. He had prepared himself to be magnanimous, to assure her that he was not a monster, that he would not truly hurt the child. He opened the file. The translation overlay rendered the human words smoothly into the pinched clicks and ripples of his own language. He read the opening line and felt a brief spark of triumph. Ah, here it is. The refusal, the posturing. Things were still following the usual script. Then he reached the list. He saw, laid out in neat columns, identifiers that no human should know. Bank accounts tied to cutouts in the spiral cartel's financial networks. Docking ports in anonymous stations. Names of low-level asset managers. Call signs of ships that had never transmitted under their true registry. He scrolled, tentacles tightening. The list went on and on. It ended with that single, unadorned sentence. Veskir read it 3 times, his eyes narrowing with each pass. He had faced threats before. He had ignored the roars of hot-headed rivals, the puffed-up declarations of minor warlords. Humans, in his experience, reacted with tears and shouting and sometimes with poorly directed violence. This felt different. His second-in-command, a lean Kraethel whose mantle bore the scars of too many close calls with decompression, drifted closer. "What do they say?" she asked, head craned to see. Veskir forwarded the message to her terminal without comment. He watched her mantle darken as she read. "They are bluffing," she said after a moment, but there was a question in it. "Of course," Veskir replied automatically. But a part of him, the part that had survived this long by listening to nerves as much as to logic, felt a chill. Back on New Samarkand, the response room hummed with quiet activity. Sigrun Protocol, once invoked, did not merely authorize a military mission. It triggered a cascade. Messages went out to human trade guilds, warning that certain identifiers, once confirmed, would be embargoed. Banks received flags instructing them to quietly but firmly refuse certain transfers. Civilian netizens, long primed to respond to flagged calls, saw a simple icon appear on their feeds. A stylized knot, the sign of Ariadne. Miran watched from his station aboard SBF Peregrine's path as nodes lit up on his displays. The frigate had been Rian's command for 2 years, a fast response ship built for long legs and quick thinking. It docked now at New Samarkand's military ring, its hull black against the dimmed station lights. Within an hour, Peregrine's path was alive. Crew hustled through narrow corridors, snapping latches, checking seals. Amrita Sorelli skimmed a hand over her pilot's console, a familiar lover's gesture for a machine that had seen her through more than one bad burn. Sigrun Protocol gave her access to something she rarely touched, the Vanta Drive's deepest capacities. The Vanta Drive was human in a deeply characteristic way. It was not the safest method of faster-than-light transit. Olicari phase sails and Mathri gravitational kites were more elegant, smoother. The Vanta Drive was the result of a human engineer looking at the universe's constraints and asking, what if we push here until it screams? It allowed brief, brutal dives through warped space-time, skimming so close to theoretical limits that most alien navigation AIs simply refused to execute its maneuvers. Humans, with their messy brains and strange relationship to risk, had embraced it. Amrita had flown enough to know its quirks, the way the hull vibrated when the drive engaged, the way your teeth ached afterward, the way time seemed to blur around the edges. She spoke to the ship under her breath now as she ran diagnostic routines. "We're going to do something stupid," she told it. "But we'll be careful about it, I promise." Kojo Mensa, strapped into the armory station just off the main corridor. Hands running through the checklist with the same easy rhythm he used to tap beats on a mess table. Years of habit steadied him. Behind his relaxed posture was a bone-deep readiness. He had been on the other side of enough doors to know what could go wrong. He thought of his own younger cousins, left behind in a sunlit city on Earth, and felt a steady anger. Not hot enough to burn, but hot enough to keep him sharp. Miran's fingers flew over holokeys, drawing in data from every willing civilian sensor, every allied station. The Ariadne net pulsed with life. It had been built for dispatch, for trade optimization, for early warning systems against hazards. Now, it became an enormous, coordinated searchlight. On Ararat's spindle, a recording of Noura's abduction circulated among the inhabitants. People watched it on work breaks, in corridors, huddled in cramped rooms. Rage and fear spread, but so did something else. Resolve. Habitat workers volunteered time to comb through maintenance logs. Dockers flagged suspicious cargo they had seen earlier that day. On planets and stations entire, human schoolchildren sent messages to Noura, recorded on shaky terminals, little voices saying, "Hold on, they're coming." Data clusters of these messages threaded into the net. Miran did not intend to use them, but they were there, a background noise of solidarity. Across 1.25 jumps, in Mathri space, Selkin Haru stood before his council and delivered a report that would ripple outward. "We must understand," he said, his scales a sober deep blue, "that humans see this not as a single crime, but as the opening of a door. Their doctrine treats it as a change in the rules, not a deviation. They will respond with disproportionate force, not only because they grieve, but because they believe that only by changing the environment will this not happen again." Elders murmured. One, her scales a shimmering gold of long service, clicked her teeth thoughtfully. "Will they destabilize the border?" she asked. Selken considered. "They will certainly destabilize the Kraethel," he said, "and the spiral cartel nodes that support them. Whether that spills over depends on how wise the rest of us are." "You counsel restraint?" another asked. "Or distance?" "I counsel that we do not attempt to talk them down," Selchen said. "To grasp at a human in this state is to invite the shock through your own bones." He remembered Leena's eyes. They haunted him more than the kidnapper's message. Back aboard Peregrine's path, Rian stepped into the compact briefing room, feeling the deck hum under his boots as the ship's reactors ramped up. A projection of the local star map floated over the table, showing New Samarkand, Ararat Spindle, and the curling smear of the Capri expanse beyond. Kojo, Amrita, Miran, Tomash, and Selchen were already there, anchored with boot magnets or tail grips in Selchen's case. "We have a trajectory," Miran began without preamble. The pod was moved to a shuttle with a spoofed maintenance profile. That shuttle attached to an unregistered craft that departed on a heading consistent with a Kepri entry vector. He gestured, and a line pulsed out from Ararat's spindle into the dark. "We have 3 probable waypoints along the path. The first is Port Lumina. Selchen's scales rippled in recognition. A so-called neutral free port, he said, meaning it obeys only the rules it finds profitable at the moment. And currently, Mirren said, it finds the Spiral Cartel profitable, which finds the Kraethel profitable, Kojo added grimly. Rian nodded. Then Port Lumina is our first stop. Amrita, we will need everything the Vanta Drive can safely give us. I want to be there before the trail cools. Amrita's smile was quick and sharp. Defined safely, sir. Arriving in enough pieces to conduct a boarding action, Rian said dryly. I trust your judgment beyond that. He turned to Kojo. I want a team prepped for covert boarding. This is still a neutral port. We need eyes and leverage before bullets. Kojo thumped a fist lightly to his chest. We'll be ready, Captain. Tomasz raised a hand. Remember that we cannot afford open conflict with the Mathri or Olikari over one station, he said. Whatever we do at Port Lumina, we must maintain a veneer of plausible deniability. I'm very good at veneers, Rian murmured. His gaze swept the room. We are not here to burn every bridge in the galaxy, only the ones that make money from this kind of crime. He thought of Noura, somewhere out there in a cramped compartment, wondering if anyone was coming. He thought of Noura's classmates, the way they had watched the pod drift away, powerless. He let that image sharpen his focus. Make no mistake, he said. We will bring her home. But the work does not end there. Peregrine's path slipped its moorings at 9 p.m. local, sliding out of New Samarkand's shadow on silent thrusters. When she cleared the safe perimeter, Amrita keyed in coordinates that made the ship's navigation AI whine in protest. Override, acknowledged, it finally said in a voice flat with synthetic resignation. Engaging Vanta Drive. Space rippled. For a heartbeat, every person aboard felt the world twist, their inner ears singing with a pressure change that did not come from any direction. The stars outside stretched into threads, then snapped back. When Peregrine's path settled, Port Lumina hung before them, a sprawling tangle of modular habitats and docking rings wrapped around a central spinal cylinder. Light bled from 1,000 mismatched windows. Tugboats and cargo haulers swam lazily around it like remoras around a whale. Officially, Port Lumina belonged to no one. In practice, the Spiral Cartel made sure it ran on time. Amrita eased the frigate into a registered slip under the flag of a generic human trade vessel. Rian stepped onto the narrow gangway with Tomasz and Selken, clothes chosen to emphasize their roles as merchants and diplomats, not warriors. Behind them, hidden in maintenance crawlways, Kojo's team flowed like shadows, heading for less visible access points. Port Lumina smelled, as all such stations did, of too many species crammed into too little space. Recycled air, spices that clung to nostrils, the faint iron tang of coolant leaks. Its corridors pulsed with life at any hour. Human vendors argued with Mathri traders over algae prices. Olikari set up delicate crystalline arrays in niches to catch whispers of data. Veskir's intermediary awaited them in a cramped bar tucked under a bulkhead rib, the kind of place that seemed to exist in the shadow of every port. He was Kraethel, but younger than Veskir, his mantle unscarred, his eyes quick with the nervousness of someone who had never been this close to a major operation before. He did not know yet that humans were looking for him. He believed himself to be simply one more link in the profitable chain of misfortune. Kojo's team reached the bar first, sliding through a service hatch from the corridor behind. They wore nondescript overalls, their equipment hidden in tool belts and backpacks. One of them, a woman with a tattoo of a mountain range along one forearm, wandered past the bar's rear entrance, accidentally jostling a sensor cluster the cartel used to monitor patrons. As planned, the sensor feed flickered, then went dark for a precious 20 seconds. Rian entered from the front, as if nothing unusual were happening. Tomasz strode beside him, every line of his body reading as harmless bureaucrat. The young Kraethel sat coiled in a corner, nursing a drink that smoked faintly. His eyes tracked the human arrivals with wary curiosity, until a quiet chime in his internal implant signaled the arrival of a message. He palmed a portable display, expecting a simple status update. Instead, his world abruptly filled with lines of human text. His translator struggled for a moment, then resolved the message. A recorded voice, calm and steady. It said his name. It listed, in quick succession, the names of his siblings. It described, with clinical precision, 3 minor infractions he had committed as a juvenile back on his homeworld. By the time it reached his adult career milestones, his mantle had gone nearly black with fear. Kojo appeared at his side, not brandishing a weapon, his hands open. "Hello," he said softly, in perfectly accented Kraethel. It was a dialect the intermediary had not heard a human use before. An intimate street patois. "Sit still," Kojo continued. "We're not here to hurt you. We're here to show you something." On a small, portable hollow, Miron streamed in a visualization from Peregrine's path. It was a 3-dimensional cloud of points, each representing a data item tagged in relation to the kidnapping. Transactions, ship movements, comm exchanges. Threads connected them, forming a web that thickened in places, thinned in others. "You are here," Kojo said, touching one point. It glowed. "Your boss is here." Another glow. A cluster around Veskir's operations. "We can follow every payment, every dock, every call. We will not stop." The Kraethel swallowed, if such a creature could be said to have a throat. "You will kill us," he whispered. Kojo shook his head. "We don't have to. Your own people will do that once they realize what you've brought down on them." He let that sink in, then softened his tone. "Help us instead. Tell us where the child is going. Maybe you get to visit your home again someday. Maybe you get to start over somewhere else, under another name. But understand this. If you do nothing, there is no safe harbor for you left in this galaxy. We will outlive your boss's patience." Fear fought with self-preservation. Loyalty, such as it was, lost. The intermediary's tentacles twitched. "They are taking her to the Dalan Rift," he said. "To a shipyard there, a fortress. Veskir has friends among the Zinthari. They intended to keep her as a trade piece, but now he talks of selling her entirely to buy safety." That last word, in Kraethel, held the same desperate weight as in any language. Rian listened from the far side of the bar, his beer untouched. He watched the way Kojo leaned in, not as a torturer but as an almost brother. Humans, he thought, do their best work when they convince you they are just like you, even when they are not. Amrita, back on the ship, plotted a course for the Dalan Rift that made the Vanta Drive safety margin go from reasonable to "you must be joking." The Rift was a nebula of turbulent gases and magnetic storms, a place where sensors went blind and inexperienced pilots went to die. Think of it this way. She told the ship's navigation AI as she input the path. "If we survive, you'll be famous in the next firmware update. If we do not survive," the AI replied, "I will not care." "Now you're getting it," she said, and grinned. While Peregrine's path spun up for the jump, the rest of the galaxy began to sense the shape of what was happening. Zinthari commanders in distant, spined ships received reports that humans had invoked an obscure protocol and were moving heavily against Kraethel assets. The Zinthari, always alert to weakness, saw an opportunity. If the Kraethel syndicate were weakened here, on the edges, then deep in Kepri there would be unguarded caches, routes, shoals. They began to shift ships without yet admitting, even to themselves, that they were responding to human actions. On Olikari data-worlds, crystalline nets thrummed as information brokers ran models. The projected profitability of hostage-taking of humans dropped precipitously, replaced by a widening band of volatility and risk. The cold logic of profit and loss spoke in a voice older than any moral code. Olikari quietly began to cut ties with Kraethel, dealing in sentient cargo. In Mathri schools, younglings watched recordings of a human captain addressing a writhing committee, explaining in careful detail what would happen if their government chose to shield Kraethel operatives. The recording was a few hours old and already proliferating across private channels. And somewhere in the cramped, dark interior of a Kraethel transport crossing a patch of unremarkable space, Noura opened her eyes again. She had no way of marking time precisely. The interior lights never dimmed. Meals, such as they were, arrived at irregular intervals. Packets of nutrient gel squeegeed into her hands by an unseen gaoler. The pod she had first boarded was gone now. She lay on a webbed cot in a strapped-down crate, the hull humming around her. In the first hours, she had cried. The sound had gone nowhere, swallowed by the padding. Then, gradually, tears had given way to something else. Noura had grown up in a rotating cylinder. Gravity was a suggestion there, a gentle pull that could be ignored with a good push. As soon as the artificial gravity of the pod had failed, she had felt a little more at home, if home could be said to exist here. She listened to the sounds around her. The physics lessons she had half ignored came back now, half remembered. The way acceleration felt, the pitch of a drive when it cut over to a different mode. She mapped these sensations against what she imagined of space. She also paid attention to the one Kraethel who occasionally checked on her. He, or perhaps she, Noura, did not know how to tell, floated at the hatch to her crate, pressing a palm against a sensor to cycle the lock, gliding in to drop the food, gliding out again. The tentacles moved in patterns. The mantle brushed certain surfaces. On the third visit, the Kraethel drifted closer than usual. The crate jolted as the ship passed some unseen turbulence, and the alien reached out reflexively, one tentacle bracing against the side of Noura's palate. The tentacle passed near Noura's wrist. She had always been quick with her hands. In her cradle days, her mother had cursed softly as fingers found controls they ought not to. Now, without fully thinking it through, Noura let her hand flop as if in exhaustion, then flicked two fingers in a practiced loop she had once used to filch a snack from a distracted friend. Her fingertips brushed a small, smooth bump on the Kraethel's tentacle. It pulsed under her touch. The Kraethel jerked back, startled, then muttered something in its own language and left. Noura opened her hand. Between two fingers, pinched tight, lay a tiny metal chip, an access token, the size of a grain of rice. She stared at it for a long time, heart beating fast. Fear warred with a childish awe at the fact that she had taken something from a creature that had taken everything from her in turn. She tucked the chip into the seam of her palate and waited. When the ship finally docked, she knew it before any hatch opened. The hum of the drives changed. New sounds filtered through the hull, clanks of docking rings, the distant thrum of a much larger structure. Delon Rift's fortress shipyard was an ugly miracle. The Kraethel had stolen an asteroid and carved it into a spiny ball, wrapping it in dock arms and gun towers. It hung in the unstable glow of the Rift's storms, feeding on the commerce of fear. The fortress had not been built for comfort. It had been built to repel outsiders with confusion. Magnetic fields made compass readings meaningless. Shifting radiation made sensors unreliable. Any ship that did not know the exact entry lane would be shredded by mines or driven into rocks by gravitational eddies. Veskir Droll believed his lair invulnerable. He had poured credits and favors into it. No human, no Mathri, no Zinthari had ever breached it in force. As Noura's crate slid through its docking corridors, Veskir waited in a central chamber, tentacles coiled, mantle flushed with a mixture of stress and pride. He had defied the humans. They had responded with threats. Now he would secure a more powerful protector. On a channel reserved for dignitaries, a Zinthari voice resounded, cold and smooth as polished bone. "You have something we want, Kraethel," it said. "A specimen, a piece of leverage. Bring it to us, and we will consider you for patronage." Veskir shivered with wary delight. To be under Zinthari patronage was to be propped up by a cruel god, but it was also to be shielded from lesser dangers. The humans, these new variables, could be fended off with the same sharp spines that had broken other rivals. He replied with elaborate courtesy, naming docks and times. In the distortion-twisted space just outside the rift, Peregrine's path dropped out of Vanta Drive, hull singing. Alarms chimed as systems recalibrated. Amrita cursed affectionately and patted her console. "You did well," she told the ship. Once more into the maelstrom. Mirren's displays went haywire for a moment as the rift's storms clawed at the sensors. Then, one by one, filters kicked in. It helped that the Ariadne net had quietly seeded passive nodes around the rift years earlier. Experimental relays tossed in like buoys into a storm. Picking up a gravitational distortion consistent with a large artificial structure, Mirren said. Bearing 083 relative range. Far enough that I do not like it. Do you ever like any range? Kojo muttered under his breath.
Only when it is infinite, and nothing can reach us,
Mirren replied dryly. Rian studied the projection. The fortress shipyard's shape emerged slowly, ghostly at first, then with harder lines as data consolidated.
It bristled with turrets, mine layers, dock arms. Smaller vessels swarmed around it like insects. We will not be able to simply stroll up, Selchin observed. We never could, Rian said.
But we can make them open their own doors. He outlined a plan in quick strokes. An obvious human warship arriving would trigger protocols, perhaps provoke the Kraethel into killing their hostage preemptively.
Instead, they would use the galaxy's own hunger against it.
Within minutes, Peregrine's path began to broadcast. Not on official channels, not under a human flag, but on the back alleys of the Spiral Cartel's net. The data Miran fed into those veins was a mix of truth and well-crafted lies. Simulations of human kinetic strikes, taking apart pirate bases. Lists of Kraethel accounts, already frozen. Whispers that Zinthari had cut secret deals with humans to carve up the syndicate. Among the pirate flotillas around the fortress, paranoia was already simmering. Some captains were loyal to Veskir. Most were loyal only to profit. As the new rumors bled through, as they saw their bank balances flicker, as they heard that humans had tagged their ships in some implacable ledger, loyalty thinned. One pirate captain, a scarred Mathri with a history of poor impulse control, ordered a course away from the fortress, muttering that no amount of Kraethel promises was worth being on the wrong side of whatever this was. Another sent a tight beam message to her Zinthari handler, asking whether she was now expected to die for Veskir's mistakes. The reply was so ambiguous as to be a non-answer. She peeled off, too.
Veskir watched all this with growing rage.
His mantle flushed a sickly mottled green.
"Cowards!" he hissed. "Traitors!"
He ordered his inner defensive ring to lock down. He ordered the child moved immediately to the inner sanctum. If the outer defenses faltered, he wanted his bargaining chip close. This order, transmitted in haste through corridors and relay nodes, was intercepted by a listening routine Miran had seeded into the cartel's networks days ago. It did not reveal precise coordinates, but it did tell the humans one crucial fact. Noura was still alive and had not yet been handed to the Zinthari. Rian exhaled slowly. One piece of the race was still winnable. "We go now," he said. "Kojo, take your team to the breach pods. Amrita, get us in as close as you can without triggering their full batteries." Kojo clapped a hand on his shoulder lightly as he passed.
"We'll get her," he said. He believed it. Belief, on the edge of battle, was a tool as sharp as any weapon. The breach pods Peregrine's path carried were not built by any respectable manufacturer.
They had begun life as mining capsules, meant to slam into asteroids and deploy drilling rigs. Kojo's Marines had hollowed them out and filled them with harnesses, breaching charges, and grim jokes. As they strapped in, one Marine hummed a tune under her breath, the same song she had used to distract nieces at bedtime. Another checked a worn photograph taped inside his helmet, a weathered house on a hillside, a dog mid-leap. Kojo checked their faces, seeing their fear, anticipation, determination. He knew he was asking them to step into a meat grinder. He also knew they would do it without hesitation. "We go in hard, we go in fast," he told them. "Remember, our job is not to win the battle. Our job is to find a child and get her out. Everything else is noise." The pods spat from Peregrine's path like seeds, their burn systems screeching in protest as they rode the strange currents of the rift toward the fortress. Automated guns spat blindly into the storms, shredding 3 empty decoy pods. The real ones rode a timing window Amrita had carved by slipping Peregrine's path through the outer defenses, jamming patterns flashing like mirror flare in front of targeting sensors. Inside the fortress, Noura felt the tremor of distant impacts. The Kraethel who guarded her reacted with sharp alarm, chattering into communication implants. The lights flickered as power rerouted.
Noura had been waiting for such a disruption. She dug her fingers into the pallet seam, feeling the chip she had stolen. She fumbled it out, her hands sweating. On the wall near her head, a small panel glowed with control indicators. She had watched the guard touch it every time the hatch opened. Now, as the fortress shuddered, she guessed that some of its safety routines might be in flux. She pressed the chip against the panel. It did not fit neatly into any slot, but when she moved it around, the panel's glow hiccuped. A low, rising tone sounded. Elsewhere in the fortress, in maintenance corridors, where few higher-ups ever went, a decompression alarm flashed red. Bulkheads slammed shut in sequence, doors sealed, cutting off sections of corridors. The Kraethel escort squad that had been on its way to move Noura found themselves trapped in a dead-end passage, banging tentacles against a locked hatch. Noura's own hatch cycled in response to the emergency pattern. The crate shifted as atmosphere equalized. The door hissed open a crack. Noura did not hesitate. She wriggled through the gap, scraping her knees, ignoring the sting. The corridor beyond twisted with the fortress's spin. Artificial gravity was inconsistent here, pulling her sideways one moment, up the next. She had learned to move in variable gravity as a game. Now she applied that same learned joy to a deadly context. She pushed off surfaces at odd angles, using the shifts to her advantage. Her small body slipped through gaps an adult could not have managed. Behind her, a Kraethel guard shouted in surprise. A tentacle lashed the air where she had been. In the maze of the fortress's interior, Noura's movements were random on the small scale, but on the large, a pattern emerged. She always moved away from the heaviest vibrations, away from the central rumble. Without knowing it, she was heading toward the outer hull. Kojo's breach pod hit the fortress like a meteor. The outer hull buckled inward under the shape's charge. The pod drilled a few meters in, then blew its own doors outward. The first Marine out was dead before her boots touched metal, a slug tearing through her helmet. Kojo stepped over her without slowing, firing disciplined bursts down the corridor. Smoke and sparks filled the air as Kraethel defenders and their drone auxiliaries returned fire. The fight was messy and close. Microgravity turned spills of blood into drifting globes. Shrieks in Kraethel and human curses mingled. Miran's voice came over Kojo's earlink, steadier than any gun. "You have incoming from your 8 o'clock 3 hostiles," he reported. "And I am picking up a smaller life sign moving 2 levels above you, heading approximately toward your location. Size and pattern suggest a human juvenile." Kojo's heart jerked. "Copy," he said. "Mark me a path." Miran juggled sensor ghosts and real echoes, pulling scraps of data from intermittent pings. Ariadne's net was patchy here, but his routines were designed for precisely such imperfection. He painted a route on Kojo's heads-up display. Through a tangle of maintenance shafts, a climb along a service ladder that was now a sideways tunnel thanks to shifting gravity. Kojo grabbed 2 Marines. "You, with me. Rest of you, hold this point. If we don't come back, complete the package and exfil on your own." No one protested. Orders given in that tone were not invitations to debate. They cut into the maintenance shafts, their heavier armor scraping sparks off the walls. Air hissed through microfractures. The hull groaned with distant impacts and the weird tides of the rift. Noura, huddled in a junction where 3 corridors met, heard the approach before she saw anyone. The clang of boots, the harsh human shouts. She pressed herself against the inner curve of the wall, heart hammering, unsure whether to run toward or away. A helmeted face appeared around the corner, visor lit by internal HUD glow. For a moment, Noura froze like a startled animal. The stranger's suit was alien in a different way than her captor's exoshells, bulky and angular. Then the visor retracted, and a human face looked at her. Dark eyes, earnest, mouth twisted into a half-grin that was all apology. "Hey," Kojo said, in the calm voice he used to wake civilians in disaster zones. "Noura, right? I'm Kojo. Your ride's here." Her brain shorted out on the familiarity of hearing her own name. "You're human," she said, as if reassuring herself. He nodded. "Last I checked, can you move?" She nodded hard, limbs suddenly weak with shock and relief. Kojo slung his rifle, stepping close. "Turn around," he said gently. "I'm going to clip you to me so we don't get separated, all right? It'll feel weird." She obeyed, letting him fasten a harness around her. When she felt the solid weight of his chest plate against her back, something in her finally allowed itself to believe that this might not end in a cold cell somewhere. As they moved back through the corridors, Miran updated routes in real time, steering them away from the worst fighting. Twice, Kojo's group ducked through hatchways, seconds before a corridor behind them sealed or vented. Once, they crawled over the bodies of 2 Marines Kojo had left at a crossroads, their suits holed, their blood turning into floating crimson beads. Noura bit her lip until she tasted iron. Kojo felt her small frame tremble. He did not have a hand free to comfort her, but he spoke, low and steady. "Almost there," he said. "Just a few more turns. You are doing better than most recruits. You know that?" At the same time, at the heart of the fortress, Veskir watched a different part of his world come apart. His command center screens showed Peregrine's path skimming the outer edge of the minefield, her profile flickering as Amrita danced her through narrow windows in the automated targeting. He saw pirate ships peeling away, their captains unwilling to die for his pride. He saw internal cameras glitching as semiconductor arrays overloaded. The humans had forced him onto the defensive faster than he had thought possible. Rage and fear warred in his mind. He lashed out at subordinates, accused them of betrayal, ordered impossible maneuvers. When a sensor tech reported the approach of a Zinthari cruiser, his mantle flushed a desperate violet. "Open a direct channel," he snarled. "Tell them I am ready to deliver their prize." "They do not respond," the tech said, voice thin. "They are scanning. Their weapons are priming." On Peregrine's Path's bridge, Amrita felt the ship shudder as the Vanta Drive's capacitors spooled up again. Rian stood braced, every muscle in his body taut. Veskir had one last card, the bioweapon the Zinthari had gifted him for emergencies. It lay in a vault below the command center, a nasty lump of engineered life that could turn half the rift into a storm of seething, self-replicating death if it were released. "Trigger the failsafe," he ordered. "If we cannot hold them, we will deny them everything." His techs hesitated. There had been quiet doubts, even among the Kraethel, about the wisdom of keeping such a thing aboard. "If we detonate," one began, "we kill ourselves as well, and perhaps the Zinthari. Then we die with our spines stiff," Veskir snapped. In that moment, Rian's decision reached its culmination. Miran had detected, moments earlier, a surge of energy around the bioweapon vault. The readings were wrong for any normal defensive system. When he fed them into the Ariadne Net's analysis routines, a signature pattern came back, flagged with every ugly incident report humanity had about Zinthari biowarfare. He relayed the findings to Rian in clipped sentences. "If they trigger that thing, the entire rift could become a no-go zone for centuries. And Noura." Rian did not let him finish. The possibilities unspooled in his mind. Containment failures, mutant plagues, the weight of future deaths on his conscience. He saw one, way out, and it was as dangerous as any he had ever considered. "The vault's location?" he asked. Miran overlaid it on the holographic schematic of the fortress, a hardened node, anchored deep, connected to the external structure by a lattice of support struts. "We can't reach it with conventional fire before they trigger it," Miran said. "No," Rian agreed. "But maybe we don't have to." He turned to Amrita. "Could the Vanta Drive generate a shear along those support struts? Not a full jump, just a twist, a cut." Amrita stared at him, then at the schematic, then at the drive readouts. The plan was half mad. The Vanta Drive was not meant for such fine work. It was a sledgehammer, not a scalpel. "If we miscalculate," she said slowly, "we tear ourselves apart. Or we rip the fortress open and kill everyone inside, including the child. If we do nothing, they unleash that thing anyway," Rian said. "And we all die slower." Amrita's mind flicked through equations, instincts, hundreds of small experiences accumulated in years of flight. She knew her ship's tolerances better than any simulation could. She believed, just barely, that she could thread this needle. "I can do it," she said. "Maybe, probably. But we will come out of it half-blind and limping."
Rian did not hesitate. "We can limp home," he said. "We cannot come home at all if we are dust." He tapped the ship-wide comm. His voice rang in every compartment, reaching Kojo, reaching engineers sweating in engine bays, reaching Leena, who had insisted on riding along despite every argument, sitting tense in a jump seat. "This is the captain," he said. "We're about to do something dangerous and ugly, even by our standards. I won't pretend I am certain we will come out unscathed. What I can promise you is that it is the only way I see to stop something far worse. You all know what's at stake." He could, as captain, simply order the maneuver, but he had been raised in a culture where certain risks were chosen together. "If anyone cannot accept this," he said, "you have 10 seconds to say so." Silence filled the ship, thick as smoke. In that silence, hearts beat faster. Minds raced. Some thought of families back home. Some thought of the child they had never met, floating somewhere in that steel monstrosity ahead. No one spoke. "Very well," Rian said. "Amrita, on my mark." He did not count aloud. He watched the schematic, waited for the next surge in the vault's power signature, a perfect moment when its internal fields amplified its physical connections to the fortress. "Mark!" The Vanta Drive roared. On Peregrine's path, the universe twisted. Gravity vanished, then slammed sideways. Metal groaned in protest, louder than any scream. Crew clung to restraints. Unanchored objects became lethal projectiles for a heartbeat. Lights strobed as power rerouted. Space between the ship and the fortress buckled. For a fraction of a second, the structure of the Dahlan Rift itself seemed to twist, gas plumes bending in impossible directions. Along the line of the bioweapon vault's support struts, reality sheared. The vault lurched free of its mountings. Its automated systems fought to counter the sudden change, but they were not built for this. It tumbled sideways, then out, ripped from the fortress's gut like a rotten tooth yanked from a jaw. It spun into the storm, sliding along warping magnetic currents, then winked out as its own emergency drive engaged, flinging it into deep space. Where, exactly, no one aboard Peregrine's path knew, nor did they much care in that moment. In the command center, Veskir felt the floor jump. The disarming code he had begun to input the last, grudging act to keep from dying in his own blaze, vanished as his console blanked. The lights flickered. Air pressure dipped, then stabilized. "What happened?" he snarled. "The vault has gone," a tech stammered. "Ejected. There was a spatial anomaly." On Peregrine's path's bridge, alarms gradually quieted. Amrita's hands shook where they gripped the controls, but her eyes were bright. "We're still here," she said, half in disbelief. Rian patted the console as if he could feel the ship's relief through it. "Damage? Drives are angry but functional," the engineering officer reported. "Structural stress across 3 decks. We've lost 2 exterior sensor arrays, but we're not, a vapor cloud, so I'm counting that as a win." "Good," Rian said. "Then let's finish this." Inside the fortress, the loss of the bioweapon vault sent systemic tremors through the structure. Power grids rerouted clumsily. Backup systems struggled to handle new loads. Automated defenses went offline in patches. Miran seized the opportunity, flooding Kraethel internal channels with more corrosive information. Visuals of the vault tumbling away. Audio snippets of Veskir's panicked orders. Reminders, drawn from hacked syndicate logs, of every time Veskir had failed to pay out promised shares. If bullets had broken some of Veskir's defenses, betrayal finished the job. Kraethel and their hirelings began to turn on one another. Some barricaded themselves and broadcast surrender offers on any frequency they thought humans might be listening to. Others simply ran, grabbing whatever portable wealth they could carry. Kojo and Noura reached the breach point just as Peregrine's path's grapnels bit into the damaged hull. Kojo shoved Noura into the arms of a waiting Marine. "Get her on the ship," he barked. "Move." Noura tried to twist to see what happened to him, but her rescuer carried her toward the yawning hatch with the uncompromising efficiency of someone who has seen what hesitation costs. The air in Peregrine's path's corridor tasted different,
Recycled, yes, but with the faint tang of spices from a mess hall, the hint of human skin oil. Noura's knees buckled as traded gravities clashed under her feet. The Marine caught her. A woman with a medkit knelt in front of her. "Hi," she said softly. "You're safe now. I'm Mara. We're gonna make sure you're okay, all right?" Noura opened her mouth, closed it, then finally whispered, "My mom?" "She's aboard," Mara said. "She's been waiting." Leena had, in fact, been restrained from charging into the breach herself only by a coalition of military prudence and Tomage's calm hand. She sat now just beyond the inner airlock, tethered to a handhold, watching the open hatch with an intensity that made those around her avert their eyes. When Noura appeared, carried by a Marine whose armor was scuffed and streaked, the world narrowed to a tunnel. For a second, Noura did not recognize her. Grief and sleeplessness had hollowed Leena's face. Then something in the tilt of her head, the shape of her hands, broke through. "Mama," Noura whispered. The sound shattered Leena's composure. She lunged forward, arms opening, catching her daughter in a hold that was half embrace, half desperate attempt to fuse them back into one being. Noura clung just as tightly, fingers digging into Leena's shoulders. She felt the familiar smell of her mother's hair, the rasp of fabric, the thud of a human heartbeat against her cheek. For several long moments, time compressed to that point. Around them, crew members averted their gazes, some smiling through their own tears, some just letting out breaths they had not realized they were holding. Rian watched from a few meters away, his hands clasped behind his back. He felt something ease inside him that he had not wanted to name, because naming it would have made the risk too personal. Miran's voice, quieter than usual, broke in over the internal channel. "Captain, Zinthari's ship is holding position," he said. "They are watching. They are not intervening." "Let them watch," Rian said. He turned to a nearby console, keyed a command. "Open a broadcast to all open frequencies," he said. "And not just here. Route it through Ariadne, as far as we can push it." The ship's comm officer hesitated. "Sir, we're going to have a conversation with the galaxy," Rian said. "They should hear this while their attention is on the spectacle." Within minutes, screens and holoprojectors across multiple systems flickered. In ports and palaces, on rusted bulkheads and crystalline data sculptures, an image appeared. The interior of a human warship's bridge, battered but functional. Captain Rian Ochoa stood at its center, uniform stained, one sleeve torn, a small cut above one eye slowly oozing. He did not posture. He did not raise his voice. When he spoke, he did so as if he were delivering a technical briefing, and that made his words land harder. To anyone receiving this, he began, "My name is Rian Ochoa. I am a captain in what we call the Solar Boundary Fleet. You have seen, or will soon see, what we have just done in the Dahlan Rift. You will draw your own conclusions about our methods. I am not speaking to argue those." He let that sink in. In a Mathri cafe, Selchen Haru's image flickered as he watched, his scales a thoughtful gray. "I am speaking," Rian continued, "to make plain a doctrine we have developed. We call it the Sigrun Protocol. It governs our response when our children are taken as hostages." He listed the core tenets, not in bureaucratic language, but in plain speech. "If you take a human child to force our hand, we will treat you and every ally you call upon as a strategic enemy. We will not bargain in good faith. At best, we will talk to you to buy time. Our aim will be to neutralize your ability to do this ever again. We will use our fleets, yes, but more than that, we will use what we are good at: networks, information, persistence. We will map your assets, your routes, your partners. We will share that map, quietly or loudly, with anyone who has reason to fear you. We will undercut your finances, isolate your friends, and make your name toxic even in the places you thought safe. This is not revenge for its own sake. We are not interested in endless blood feuds. We are interested in making sure that when someone in a back room suggests, 'Let us take a human child,' it will give us leverage. Everyone else at that table laughs and says, 'Are you mad? Do you want to end us?' On a Kraethel smuggler den in another system, The room had gone silent. A younger operative glanced at his elder. The elder, who remembered a time before humans had ever left their homeworld, shivered slightly. Ryan's gaze did not harden. It remained steady, almost weary. "We know that many of you value your own young," he said. "We have seen your rituals, your nurseries, your guarding customs. We ask only that you extend to ours what you would demand for yours, that they be off limits in your power plays. If you cannot accept that, if you decide that the old hostage codes are more important than our line in the sand, then understand, you are choosing conflict with a species that will not tire before you do. We are not the strongest, or the oldest, or the richest, but we are very, very stubborn." He paused, then added, his voice softening, "And we remember." The feed cut as abruptly as it had begun. On a small, crowded ship in the Kepri expanse, Veskir Droll watched the broadcast on a cracked portable terminal. He had fled the collapsing fortress in a shuttle, using chaos and the last of his authority to secure a seat. Now he drifted in a smuggler's lane, stripped of command, his name already whispered with curses in any cartel node that knew what humans had done. He had thought, for a brief, foolish time, that if he put enough distance between himself and the disaster, if he changed his name and his markings, he might fade into the noise of the galaxy again. The broadcast dispelled that illusion. When Rian spoke of maps and memories, Veskir could almost feel the web tightening around him. He looked around the cramped cabin. 2 other Kraethel avoided his gaze. A human freighter, nondescript, was docking at the same anonymous fueling station ahead. He saw it through the small viewport, a flicker of metal and light. On the small table before him lay a data chip that had arrived an hour earlier, carried by a courier whose eyes had darted everywhere but his. Veskir had not yet opened it. His mantle twitched. He slotted the chip into his terminal. An image blossomed. A star map, not labeled, just points of light connected by lines. Some points glowed red. New red points appeared slowly, one by one, converging, inexorably, on the sector his shuttle now occupied. No words accompanied the image. None were needed. For the first time since he had ordered the kidnapping, Veskir Droll understood that he had not merely taken a hostage. He had declared a quiet war on something that would not forget him. He closed the terminal with a snap and looked up, eyes flicking to the anonymous human freighter as its docking clamps engaged with the station. There were 1,000 reasons for such a ship to be here. He knew, with a sinking certainty, that one of them was him. Back on Peregrine's path, in the aftermath, the ship's crew tended to wounds, counted their dead, and began the long, limping journey out of the rift. In a small makeshift cabin, Noura lay curled in a bunk, her mother's arm around her. Leena did not sleep. She watched Noura breathe, watched the faint smile that sometimes flitted across her face in dreams. Her mind, where it was not consumed by relief, turned to the wider implications. She knew that Sigrun Protocol's invocation would not simply vanish when this one child was safe. The task force would continue. Economic campaigns would roll on. Names would be quietly added to blacklists. Habitats and ports that had turned a blind eye would find their lifelines constricted. For now, though, she allowed herself a singular focus. Noura stirred, opened her eyes. "Are they going to do this again?" she asked, voice small. "To someone else?" Leena swallowed. Children deserved honesty, up to a point. "Some might try," she said, "but it's going to be harder for them now." "Because of what the captain said?" Noura asked. Leena nodded. "Because of what we all did," she said. "We made it hurt to think about it. Bad ideas die when they hurt enough of the wrong people." Noura considered that, then frowned. "Will it hurt us, too?" "We're entailed." Leena thought of trade disruptions, of alliances strained, of Mathri elders shaking their heads in private at human excess. "Maybe," she admitted, "but not as much as losing you would have." Noura accepted this with the pragmatic fatalism of the very young. "I liked the way you made the vines grow on the wall," she said, changing the subject with the abruptness of someone whose mind had already had its fill of fear. "The ones in the garden," Leena smiled, the expression shaky. "Life is stubborn," she said.
It finds cracks to grow in. Noura nodded, eyes already drifting closed again. Like us, she murmured, before sleep took her. Leena watched her daughter's chest rise and fall, and thought, yes, like us.